A wonderful good morning to you, Grenada, Carriacou, Martinique, the rest of the Eastern Caribbean, to you, wherever you are. Welcome to another edition of To The Point. For today, the 24th day of the month of February. Indeed, it's a pleasure being with you. I'm Joseph Cadore. You call me JC. And certainly I want to say thank you and good morning to our viewers, our listeners, first and foremost. That's with us, has been with us all morning on Classic Radio, Classic 105.5, Classic 105.9. Or those of you that's joining us now on television, GBN's Channel 7, Channel 11, and Channel 20 if you're in cable, or if you're following us via the World Wide Web at www.gbn.gd, or possibly be on our social media platforms, YouTube and Facebook. Indeed, it's a pleasure being here with you. It's Thursday morning. My guest this morning is the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, Mr. Rodney Taylor. And I want to say thank you, sir, and welcome to the program. Mr. Taylor has been in the position for just under a year when he's inching to his first his anniversary, but certainly while he's just been in the post just under a year, he certainly comes with more than 20 years of professional experience working with regional governments in the development of policies to govern information and communication across the region. Good morning to you, so thank you for being part of the program this morning.
Good morning to you, and thanks for having me, JC. Good to be here in Grenada. Good to be on your show. Good morning to all of your listeners as well.
May I ask you, is this your first time to the Isle of Spice?
Not at all. First time was 26 years ago from my wedding anniversary. Still married to the same young lady.
Well, that's because you did it on the right piece of rock.
On the spice, yeah. That's right.
Well, indeed, it's a pleasure being here. First time 26 years ago. This time you're here for professional purposes. Yesterday there was the official signing of a roaming agreement between Digicel and Flow. We're going to get into that in just a bit, but certainly before we delve into the specifics of it, it would be good, if we would be remiss of us if we don't set the background to give people an appreciation of how we got here. So the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, what do you do? Tell us about the organization first and foremost.
Yes, thank you. So we are a CARICOM institution. So, of course, CARICOM being the Caribbean community. And we're familiar with the CARICOM Secretariat. We're familiar with other institutions of CARICOM, like CARFA, for example, the Public Health Agency. There's also the Agency for Crime and Security. So we were established in 1989 by CARICOM heads of government to harmonize telecommunications policy. And you would imagine telecommunications is critical to most of our economies, and since 1989 it has only increased in significance in terms of how it drives our economic development. So at the CTU, we are based in Trinidad and Tobago. It's an intergovernmental organization, so we have 20 member states, and generally we harmonize policies related to telecommunications. We support our member states in their efforts to develop national ICT strategies and policies, legislation, regulations that govern the sector. You mentioned the roaming, for example. That is one key achievement, I would say, because we are promoting the region as one single space. So you have a single market and economy, but as a single ICT space where citizens don't have to pay and should not have to pay exorbitant charges as they move throughout the region. So anything we can do to promote cooperation on the digital front, that is falls within the CTU's mandate. And we also represent our member states as well in international organizations, international discussions around technology, such as the International Telecommunication Union. There's an organization as well, very critical, Internet Corporation for Sign Names and Numbers, that manages the domain name system for the Internet. So where there are issues and standards being discussed, then we also represent the interests of our Caribbean member states.
Is there a working relationship with ECTEL and other regional bodies?
Yeah, ECTEL is actually a member of the CTU, and they regulate, of course, for the OECS countries, telecommunications. So we work very closely with them, and a lot of what they do also impacts what happens in the wider CARICOM region.
So you have your member states, it's close to about 20 members, and you spoke about offering benefits to the membership. What are some of those core benefits? You talked about it in the open in terms of guiding policies, but if you can offer some specifics. Why is it worth your salt to be part of this regional body?
Right. So I thanks for that question, because when we talk about policies, a lot of people may not connect to it, but policies themselves help to drive investment in sector, especially to the extent that we can harmonize those policies and standards on telecommunications and information and communication technology more broadly. So the companies like Digicel, like Cable and Wireless, are more encouraged to invest. They find it easier to do business when there are standardized policies, when there are standards in terms of how we allocate spectrum that allows for mobile communication. And therefore, to the extent to which we can standardize policies, we can help to drive further investment in the sector, create more jobs, and drive our economic growth and development.
For the purpose of keeping the public in tune with what we're talking about, you just mentioned spectrum. What is spectrum? What are you referring to?
So every time you make a mobile phone call, or you fly a drone, or even you use your mobile phone, this radio program, all of it is using spectrum. Basically, it's the radio frequencies that allow us to communicate, basically, radio wave frequencies. And that has to be managed, because if it is not, then there is serious interference. People could not be hearing the radio station properly. The calls would be, overlapping each other and stuff like that. It would be serious interference. So there are global standards on how that spectrum is allocated, including for emergency communications, like security forces and stuff like that, the airplanes. All of those wireless communication devices rely on spectrum to communicate effectively, and therefore there have to be standards and policies on how those things are managed.
So the CTU as an organization, ECTEL, your role goes beyond just the region. We literally part, whether we like it or not, of a bigger global conversation, and really give teeth to the expression that we live within a global village.
Definitely. You look at the internet, for example, there are standards around how we communicate over the internet, and clearly we have to comply with those global standards. We have to be able to further impact how those standards are developed. One of the things we talked about just last month is the whole issue of the metaverse, and that being the next evolution of the internet, and how can we position ourselves to benefit from this new evolution of the internet. So yes, there is definitely a global conversation, because the internet itself is a global resource. Spectrum, how that is allocated, has to be managed at a global level as well. So yes, there's a very big global conversation going on, and as technology gains more prominence, that it is very important for our Caribbean islands to be a part of that conversation, and not to be left behind as the other developed countries, take advantage and so on.
And as you talk about not getting left behind, we finding carving our own little niche within this global space, and we know there's a lot of challenges to it. Let's talk, because you brought it up initially. I was hoping we could take care of it later on. So let's just delve straight into the roaming agreement as it is. So let's first put it in the context so that the average person understands. When you talk about roaming, what exactly are we referring to in the telecommunications space?
Yes, thank you. So if you're in Grenada, you subscribe, your mobile service is provided by, Digicel or Cable and Wireless. For most of the Caribbean, those are the two dominant providers. There are a few other providers in, say, Belize, Suriname, and so on, that are not pan-Caribbean. But you are a customer of Digicel in Grenada. You want to travel for business or pleasure in Trinidad, in Barbados, Jamaica, what have you, within CARICOM. There has to be agreements that allow you to connect and call home or access your data, services, your email, and so on in a foreign country. Very often, though, that connection that you make is very costly, because you're paying to basically be on somebody else's network. And what we're saying is that within CARICOM, because we're promoting a single market and economy, and we're promoting a single ICT space, which is the digital arm of the CSME, we don't want CARICOM customers to be paying these exorbitant charges. I mean, really, really exorbitant charges, what we refer to as bill shock. People come back and they're totally devastated because, there's a bill of $5,000 or $10,000. And in many cases, people can't even pay, to be honest. So what we said is that, we don't, this is one region, this is one community, and therefore, if I'm a Digicel customer going from Barbados to Trinidad, then I'm on the Digicel network, therefore I should not be paying these charges. Certainly, yes, there's a flat rate or there's a cap cost, no problem, but certainly not to come back to the bill shock. And the same for cable and wireless and so on. And we're trying to incorporate other smaller players as well, so that it redounds to the benefit of Caribbean citizens.
Long overdue, you would say?
Heads of government have asked for this for a very long time, and yes, it is definitely overdue. And what we have been able to accomplish, we started negotiations just about 6 months ago, and I think it's definitely an historic occasion to be able to reach this point. And heads of government, in particular Prime Minister Mitchell of Grenada and Prime Minister Motley of Barbados, are really even pushing for the full and complete elimination altogether of roaming charges. But we'll take this victory of predictable, flat, reduced roaming rates for CARICOM citizens until we get to that complete elimination.
Quite interesting. And I'm assuming one of the challenges that I guess each island would have its own individual breakdown based on the rates that applies to each of the territory. But do you see this while, and is this the agreement as it is? Does it cover voice or all of the spectrum? Is it voice and data?
Voice, data, SMS messages, the full range. So whether you're surfing the internet, checking your email, doing a WhatsApp call, doing a regular phone call, sending a text message, all of it is included.
What sort of discounts, benefits? Because, very often most customers, they relate benefits and cost in dollars and cents and figures. So in terms of the conversation and the signing, what sort of savings can the general public, are they going to enjoy?
The operators have their own packages, so there wasn't any collusion. They will offer their products to the market, to their own customers, and the customers will decide what is the best package for them. The Cable and Wireless yesterday indicated that their savings were in the order of 70% on average. Based on our own analysis, there are some cases where that goes to as high as 98% reductions. Digicel as well is adding a new package, a roaming. I think they're referring to it as a passport, a roaming passport as well, and they will announce specifically how much their customers will be paying. But it will be dramatic savings for all customers on those particular networks. And in particular, there will be the elimination of bill shock, right? That exorbitant fees, then you come back that you're not even able to pay, that will disappear. That will impact, of course, businesses that traverse the region, because that exorbitant cost represents, of course, the cost of doing business. So there were significant savings, and Cable and Wireless announced yesterday that they're on average 70% reduction, which I think is significant.
Is there any guarantee from a regulatory perspective from the CTU that those savings, as it is, because the challenge is always when you have these signings and agreements, the question is whether or not it will be passed directly onto the consumer, or is this a case whereby these conglomerates trying to find a way to increase their bottom line in what is challenging economic times? How are we going to ensure that the customers really benefit?
Well, what we did yesterday was a public declaration. There is no law that mandates these companies to do it. And therefore, it is in support of the CARICOM heads of government's policy decision to create this single space that the companies have said, yes, we support this policy. We agree that this is one space. And therefore, we are publicly signing this declaration with Prime Minister Mitchell and with the support of Prime Minister Motley and the other heads of government to say this is our commitment to the region. So while there isn't a legally, at the moment, and I'm sure we'll get there eventually, but there isn't a legal and regulatory requirement for these companies to do it, but they have done it as a result of our negotiations and as a result of the leadership of Prime Minister Mitchell, Prime Minister Motley, and the other CARICOM heads of government. And the consumers will definitely, they will benefit, and certainly we will be keeping watch. There is an agreement that the companies will update us periodically if there's any change to this arrangement, and that they will engage in public awareness and education programs so that the customers know how to benefit from these packages.
I think that is always an interesting conversation, and I'm assuming is there also a timeline as to when that commitment that was expressed customers can say, well, listen, we can expect some ease, a little ease on our bills, as you said, that bill shock. Any timetable, or is it just left up to the individual companies to rule it out as they please?
Well, there's a commitment within the next 1 to 3 months, and Cable and Wireless gave a commitment that by the end of March they would have these packages on offer. Digicel also gave that same commitment. So we fully expect at the very the longest period we expect is 3 months, but they have given a commitment that they can get these packages available in a month. But then you obviously have to, make your customers aware that these packages are available. So they've been engaging in public awareness campaigns and engaging with their customers to ensure that, in fact, when they are traveling, that they're able to sign on to this new agreement.
Okay, well, I guess time will tell, and I guess if nothing happens, then at least we have this conversation that we can hold them to, that say, listen, it's a signed declaration. Why aren't you fulfilling your end of the conversation? So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to leave that there.
And I'll just say on that note that we have no reason at all to believe that they would not honor this commitment. We've had support at the very highest level of these companies, the chairman of Digicel, Mr. Dennis O'Brien, the CEO, the regional CEO for Cable and Wireless, Inge Schmitz. These are persons who met with the CARICOM heads of government, and without at all, we have no reason to believe that these companies will not honor this commitment.
Let me throw this one at you, though. There's always a conversation regarding the interconnectivity back-end arrangement that is made, and there's always the skeptics who would always say, benefits to customers, it must be the bottom line. The conversation as it relates to those interconnectivity regulatory conversations, is that also part of it as to who benefits from what, who gets what? Because I'm almost certain it's part of the conversation that somebody's looking to get a bigger piece of the pie at the end of the day.
Well, there's nothing wrong with getting a bigger piece of the pie. Just make sure that everybody benefits. So what we have always argued is that rather than trying to extract large sums from a small group of people who unfortunately turn their mobile phones on and use them while roaming and don't understand even how the charges are derived, because they may be using data in the background, they may be inadvertently updating an application or something like that. We're saying we think there's economic benefit by having these cap charges and encouraging people to use their mobile phones as they travel. So you're making, yes, there's an economic opportunity because people say rather than turning off their phone completely or trying to find a free hotspot, then they are able to roam comfortably knowing that, okay, this is a cap charge. When I get back home, I don't have to sell my house to pay my mobile phone.
Well, now that you brought the house into the conversation, I think the conversation hit right home. Having to sell your house to pay a bill. 19 minutes gone past the hour in the morning time. My guest this morning is the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, Mr. Rodney Taylor. Mr. Taylor, I had to ask you as well, the telecommunication, when you say telecommunications though, there is mobile, there is data, does it take care of all other aspects of telecommunication, whether it's handheld radios and those different paraphernalias as well?
Well, there are different types of technologies. So these companies, yes, they offer landline services, they offer internet, fixed internet services, they offer entertainment, so TV, cable TV, and so on. This agreement in particular covers mobile phone services, so calls, data, and so on.
Let's talk about the evolution of the telecommunication industry. Traditionally, it was hinged on voice calls. Voice ruled the world. And that is becoming, if probably obsolete sooner rather than later. We know VoIP has become the conversation, voice over IP. And in a lot of areas, a lot of companies, they are trying to find ways, while they have to agree that data and VoIP is the way to go, there's always the challenge of how do you mesh voice over IP over traditional revenue streams, and there's always a give and take. Some have even make efforts to try to regulate it. Is that a conversation within our territory? What can you tell me about it, if so?
Right, so you're getting very technical now with voice over internet protocol and stuff like that, which is fine. But the truth is, really, the next evolution of the internet and communications is really data. So you're right, all of that voice traffic really is moving over data packets. The old traditional analog telecommunications is for all intents and purposes dead, because it is more efficient, it is more reliable to be able to transport this traffic over internet protocols. Yes, there are discussions around that within the ITU, within the same organization I mentioned, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, that manages the DNS. So you'll see more traffic being moved over the internet. And therefore, it will require greater regulation. It will require quality of service regulations in particular, because you would know from experience that sometimes your WhatsApp call may be choppy. So those VoIP calls don't have the same level of regulations in terms of quality of service. But as we move more towards that, then those services will also have to be regulated so that there's quality of service guarantees, so that the calls aren't breaking up.
So we can assume that sign-in literally paves the way for that. That's in fact where we're headed.
Certainly, we're definitely heading there, and that's why we could not have talked about voice without talking about data as well. We had to include data because people are making data calls, not just WhatsApp, but Facebook Messenger, Viber, Signal, and what have you. And even Digicel itself has a bit app that for its customers. So they recognize, of course, like most telecoms companies, that data is where it is at, so to speak. And we had to include that, and as well as, so data voice calls, if we want to refer to as that, as well as regular email services and even broadcast content service providers like YouTube and Netflix and so on.
25 minutes gone past the hour in the morning time, and this is To The Point for today, the 24th day of the month of February. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we continue the conversation with the Secretary General of the CTU, Mr. Rodney Taylor. We'll be right back.
Join GBN on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. for Interesting Grenadians, a program that showcases the lives of interesting and outstanding Grenadians at home and abroad. It's Interesting Grenadians every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. on GBN. Don't you miss it.
I take the vaccine and I could feel a sense of freedom. I just have to continue the right COVID protocols and I'm ready for life. You telling me you're afraid of what they're putting into you? Some of all you have metal feeling in all your mouth for over 30 years and nothing can change, or you're still ugly. You worried about a vaccine that could save your life if you catch COVID? All that food with them chemicals and hormones all you eating every day. All you know what going in all your body? And you worried about a vaccine that could protect your children and your family? All you're joking, man. The amount of vaccine we take when we were children, and look at us today, 30, 40, 50 years later. And you're telling me you don't want to take a vaccine to protect your friends, your community, and your country, and get life back to normal in this pandemic? Nah, man. All you're joking. Think about it, my fellow Grenadians, Carriacouans, and Pity Matnicans. Really think about it.
This message is brought to you by the Grenada COVID Crisis Group and the Grenadians United in Virginia.
Get ready for a season of Grooving Smooth and Live on GBN. Grooving Smooth and Live is a 1-hour performance gig every Thursday from 8 p.m. featuring performances from our local musicians and short interviews discussing all things musical. Every Thursday, a different musician and a different instrument will be featured, from the violin to the saxophone to the trumpet, guitar, and steel pan. Our local musicians playing, improvising, and educating us on all genres of music. Join GBN with host musicians Matthias and Shireen, and a special guest every Thursday at 8 p.m. It's Grooving Smooth and Live on GBN.
It's 28 minutes gone past the hour of 9 o'clock in the morning time. It is to the point for today, the 24th day of February. My guest this morning is Mr. Rodney Taylor, and he is the Secretary General of the CTU as the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. We started first out the conversation. We basically was having the core of this morning's conversation as it relates to a roaming agreement signed between Digicel and Cable and Wireless Floor as it relates to opening up and making this an open telecommunication space that should see significant reduction in the roaming charges for customers. We have a caller on the line. Good morning, caller. You are live. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Cadore. Good morning. Greetings. Can your guests hear me? I'd like to guarantee that your guests can hear me.
I can, yes.
Very well. Greetings to you, sir. Welcome to Little Island, Grenada.
Thank you very much.
I'm extremely happy to hear that moves are afoot to reduce the cost of quote-unquote roaming charges so that people moving around the Caribbean can, well, that this action be facilitated at a cheaper cost and all of that. I do beg your humble indulgences, sir, if the question that I'm going to ask you as, how do you call it now? What's your position? The Chief Executive Officer?
The Secretary General of
Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. I beg your humble indulgences, but hear this. I wish to speak on behalf of people with disabilities in the Caribbean. Not delegated to do so upon my own, because we all suffer the same. And its relation to telecommunication generally. I am happy to hear you say that the initiative that your organization has taken with the governments and so on are not legally binding. It was just that you would sit as, proper thinking people to come together to resolve the problem. I'm happy it's being done. Now, on behalf of the people with particularly visual impairment, we would like to fit in to the movement of the world along technological lines. A lot of things are outside there. Verbalization, screen reading programs produced particularly by international firms at extremely high cost to the people. So, only those who can afford it may have a computer and maybe speak to them, be able to speak to them, and so they can use it. With the telephones, the faster the development, the less capacity of the visually impaired, and I particularly refer to those with total visual impairment, like me. I can't see to use my finger. I need to swipe more and more. Our governments are doing nothing to help us. And I must indeed say that I've also consulted with the service providers of our country to help us. Nothing is forthcoming. The numbers in the total Caribbean region that are visually impaired and seriously blind, I can't give you offhand. But I know in Grenada, we have more than 9,000 of our people with visual impairment according to the last census. Some of various intensities, of course, and some getting worse. But let's round up, sir. I think you understand the gist of my conversation. What can the Caribbean Telecommunications Union do to help the visually impaired of the Caribbean to reduce their costs and to guarantee their participation with machinery, equipment, gadgets, to use a commonly used word, to facilitate their transformation also, because you did say there's a serious movement to move away from analog systems to digital systems, and we are being left behind. I'd like to hear your comments, sir, and to see as soon as possible what can be done to help our people. Thank you very much, sir. Have a nice day, will you?
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Secretary General?
Sure. Thank you. Caller. I didn't get the name, but thanks for the question. And there's a whole global movement around ICTs for information and communication technologies for persons with disabilities. ICT for PWD, and we ourselves at the CTU are promoting a Caribbean Video Assistance Program, in particular for the hearing impaired, though, not so much for the visually impaired, but for the hearing impaired. There's that service that allows those persons with hearing impairments to call and use sign language, basically to be able to communicate with service providers, whether it's a bank or fast food restaurant and so on. So we are keenly aware that if we are serious about developing inclusive societies, then we have to consider how we can use the technology to improve the lives of everyone, including persons with disabilities. There exists in most of our member states a universal service fund where the operators pay into a fund to address issues of disparity, to address issues of affordability, where it may not be feasible for the operator to provide a service, or the person, even if the person is in an urban area, they cannot afford access. So what we try to promote is policies that are inclusive, and therefore governments can leverage this universal service fund to ensure that whether you're in a rural community or whether you have a disability or whether you're simply on the lower economic economic standing, that you are provided with access, because we have to develop societies that are inclusive, and that would be my response to the caller.
As part of that conversation to Secretary General, would you agree that the operators themselves, they can do more in educating their subscribers, their clients, their customers? For example, they sell you these fancy gadget phones for, we don't even get into the cost of it, although that should be a conversation. But a lot of these devices, they come equipped already in some way, form, or fashion with functionalities that assist individuals that have some form of impairment, be it visual or otherwise. But most people don't even know that is actually on the devices. So it's like they're selling you things that you have to pay for, and you don't even know that it is there. You're not even sure what it is you're paying for.
Certainly, and we encourage collaboration with organizations specifically set up to deal with persons with disabilities. In Trinidad and Tobago, we work with there's an NGO, sorry, the name slips me at the moment, but in every country there are NGOs that deal with these particular issues, and we encourage the operators to work with them because they obviously have a closer connection with the community, and therefore awareness and education on some of the benefits, some of the tools that are available to make their lives easier, that they can then be given greater exposure to that if they work in collaboration with these NGOs.
Yes, indeed, because they do offer things like voice activation for caller ID. So no longer do you necessarily need to see who's calling. But once your phone rings, the person's in your caller ID. It says to you, Sid, that Mr. Rodney Taylor is calling. Do you wish to answer? Yes, no, simple commands. It certainly would help to advance that conversation. Part of the evolution of the Caribbean, as we talk about the CARICOM single space and the single market space, and that global village, and how do we establish our niche in it? It is important that each territory be on, at least try to be on a level playing field. But very often, Mr. Taylor, for economic reasons and developmental challenges, that is not the case. But it has to be done. What role does the CTU play in trying to level that playing field so that one territory doesn't get left behind? Because if that is the case, it sort of defeats the purpose of trying to establish a regional open space, doesn't it?
Yes, and we have to understand that the single ICT space itself is grounded in the Caribbean single market and economy, which is the wider context. And again, the impetus behind that is that we have to develop together as a region. We are small island developing states. We should not try to take on the world on our own. We are stronger as a collective. We have different strengths. A lot of our countries depend heavily on tourism, and that's a huge economic earner for us. But there are other countries that have natural resources, right? You have oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago, you have gold and bauxite and so on in Guyana. But how can we improve or increase regional trade? How can we encourage businesses to offer their products and services outside of the national space, outside of their own national boundaries, and therefore be more competitive in the global context? And that cooperation is critical. And therefore, the single ICC space, as I mentioned before, encourages greater investment within the region, and it helps to drive our own economic and social development so that we're more competitive. And certainly if we don't have cutting edge and leading technologies, then our businesses as well will not be able to compete within the global market.
What are some of the challenges, though, as it is? I mean, if we take a reality check as we forward the conversation of centralizing our economic space, our digital space as well, if you were to assess where we are in terms of a timetable, truly be able to say, you know what, this is something that we can achieve. What timetable is there? Give me your own assessment from a union's perspective.
Well, I can speak from the technology perspective. The bigger issues that CARICOM heads of government will have to address in terms of issues of sovereignty, issues of cooperation that will certainly fall way beyond the boundaries of technology. And I think that, based on a lot of public statements that have been made by CARICOM heads of government, there is that spirit of cooperation willingness. As I mentioned, the heads of government drove this initiative to the single ICT space and the elimination of roaming charges within the region. So there's that political will, there's a commitment. I wouldn't call it a challenge per se, even though it does come into the mix, the issue of sovereignty. We are dealing with sovereign states. We are dealing with, different governments, and therefore there has to be that level of cooperation. In terms of the single space, now that we have achieved this particular milestone, we believe it will put some, as it were, some gas in the tank, and it will help us to go on to some bigger issues like establishing a single regulator within the space, which would help us to move towards a complete elimination. It will drive costs down for the operators. It will increase the level of investment. It will bring some other players into the market. And certainly we would move expeditiously on that. And I would say within the next 12 months, we should see some significant benefits, but we will continue year on year to move the region forward and implement fully this single ICT space.
Metaverse. It is here. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's talk about its transformative element as to how we can can take advantage of what it offers to transform our digital space?
Yes, thanks again. And we did have a webinar on the metaverse last month. It was one of our most heavily subscribed webinars, almost 1,000 people from around the world, significant participation from Barbados and Trinidad, and some of the other Caribbean islands. And why? Because it is a hot topic, but also, even though we're small states, Barbados announced that it wanted to establish an embassy in the metaverse. So in this virtual world, this immersive experience, Barbados wants to establish itself and to be able to offer services that would be offered traditionally in an embassy, a physical embassy or consulate, such as applications to passports, such as trade facilitation. How do I, if I'm trying to import stuff into Barbados or export stuff to Barbados, what are the regulations and so on. So some guidance around trade, tourism, and so on in this virtual space. We also saw St. Vincent and the Grenadines talking about having a virtual carnival. And these things are coming into greater prominence because of the pandemic, because people are home, because travel has been reduced. How can we continue to improve the immersive experience? And Zoom has, of course, replaced a lot of conferences. And therefore, how do we take this whole thing to the next level? And we don't want the world to go ahead with their technological advancements and not be a part of the conversation, but not just be a part of the conversation, but to influence, to help develop, and to benefit from the economic opportunities. So if you're an artist creating music or paintings or whatever, there's an opportunity to create what we refer to as non-fungible tokens, digital assets that can be sold, and you have the rights to maintain the rights and so on for that. So there are opportunities there, and we want the region to be able to benefit fully from those opportunities.
And we have a caller on the line. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, sir.
Yeah, we are told that the more competition we have, the prices will decrease. That's a lie to start off with. And secondly, we don't, as different countries, the Caribbean islands I'm speaking about, I believe why we don't trade with each other is that we don't trust each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, caller. Mr. Secretary General, do you want to comment?
Sure.
Share a comment?
I certainly would. Yes, thanks to the thanks to the caller for the question. Without a doubt, competition drives prices down. I would agree that our prices could be lower. I would agree that relative to some other markets globally, prices are still relatively high in the region. But without a doubt, if there was in fact no competition at all, those prices would even be higher, because if you have one player dominating the market, then they have free rein to set their prices. But the competitive forces, even we saw with the elimination of roaming, that these operators will compete for customers. They will compete and offer improved packages and be aware, cognizant of the fact that their customers are watching and are looking for a better deal. So while I could agree that we could benefit from lower prices, there is no question that competition, not just in telecommunications, in all sectors where there is competition, you will see definitely reduced prices.
Let's backtrack back to metaverse, that new virtual world. That it is the future of everything. It is the reality is that's where we are heading, into a virtual realm. But there are those who argue of the challenges that within our human space, there are things that we can do to protect our young ones. And they're putting those have argued that's one of the challenge. I was even following a report on BBC. I was just trying to find it again. I was reading it yesterday. A BBC reporter that went on the cover and brought some really telling things to the fore, that as it relates to minors and the vulnerability in that virtual space. From a union's perspective, What plans? What can you say to us in terms of being able to police, I shouldn't say police, regulate and control what happens there? While it's virtual, but certainly it does raise some safety concerns as it relates to our minors, young people.
Absolutely. And prior to the Metaverse webinar, we did have a forum in partnership with UNESCO and with the ITU on ICT in education, because, of course, we are driving our children, not that we had to drive them because they're already online, but we're delivering education in an online environment. And part of this last session we held spoke about child online protection, and the ITU has a program around that, seeking to raise awareness for parents of some of the challenges. So not just in terms of inappropriate content, but in terms of things like cyberbullying and so on, their own personal safety. They may disclose information, data privacy, data protection, that they may disclose information to someone who's posing, as someone else. And therefore, it is critical that we raise awareness. And there's no question that the children are more tech savvy. They know how to use the mobile phones, and they show their parents and the teachers how to use the devices. So it is a challenge, and we have to make access to inappropriate content difficult. We have to ensure that there are laws that govern against things that are certainly illegal, that there are standards around what can and cannot be offered in an online environment. So we are cognizant of that. We work with organizations like the ITU on programs around child online protection and cyber security.
It's 13 minutes onto the hour of 10 o'clock. This is To The Point in the morning. In case you're just joining me, my guest this morning is Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, Mr. Rodney Taylor. Mr. Taylor, I want us to look at internet penetration, and I want us to look specifically, bring it home. COVID has unveiled, and I want to say unveiled because many say COVID has created issues. It doesn't. To me, it hasn't created anything, but it has unveiled some of our dark areas that we're lagging behind. For us, and I'm thinking, looking at Grenada and across the region, where online learning, virtual learning, we've been thrusted into it, and to me, there is no turning back. However, there is the conversation as it relates to internet penetration in many of our small islands that creates and put many at a disadvantage, whether it's the penetration percent levels or even the cost of the device, those devices. As a union, how much of a concern is that to you?
It is a very big concern to us, and I mentioned the universal service funds, which we definitely advocate for, because in any society you will have people who simply cannot afford internet access. It's not that the internet line or the cable doesn't pass in front of their house, but they simply cannot afford to pay for it, and therefore, you're competing with everyday basics, food, and public transportation and school books and clothes and so on. And therefore, we certainly advocate for the establishment of universal service funds that can address that imbalance. Because if you don't address it, then you're creating a society that is disparate. You're furthering the inequalities. And yes, the COVID has exposed that, because we take it for granted that all school children had access to internet and devices, but that is not the case. There were thousands of children who simply could not access the internet. They could not. We had heard stories of even parents sharing a phone, and even in households where there are 3 or 4 children, right? That would mean for 3 or 4 devices, and therefore we saw a lot of philanthropic efforts to provide devices for children to access. We saw the providers themselves providing special packages for children to access. So it is a very big issue for us, and we want to see equality in terms of how the technology is deployed, and equality in how our children access these new economic opportunities in this digital environment.
435-2041, that's the number on the inside. I want to say thanks to those of you that's contributing and they've chimed in via our Facebook page. Connectivity challenges, COVID, ensuring each and every one is on the same page. Economies of scale, signs of markets, whether or not, the question of whether or not a telecommunication provider is willing to invest. One of the challenges, especially in small markets, is the cost to invest as it relates to the potential returns. And very often, because of those challenges, you find small developing states, the Caribbean, and even within the region, they are the smaller territories where they are always lagging behind, because that which it takes to invest, companies are always thinking it doesn't make sense economically, especially within the global context of things where there's an economic squeeze. Is that a conversation that's happening within the union? And how do we get beyond that one in particular? It would always put some regions at a disadvantage and others on the other side of the spectrum.
Yes, and rest assured that the companies would not be here in the region unless it is a profitable place to do business. So they are here, they are making money, but what they're asking for is to help reduce the cost of doing business. So the regulations that are disjointed from Barbados to Trinidad and Jamaica and so on, even though they're trying to operate a regional business, if there are different regulatory requirements in each market, it increases their cost of doing business. They're saying if we can reduce that cost, then they can pass the savings on to the customers and they can continue to operate profitably. All of these companies have investors. Investors want return on their investment in any business. And so we have to continue to make the region an attractive place to do business. It becomes much more attractive if we are able to leverage it as one space. So you move beyond the 300,000 population in Barbados to millions within the CARICOM single market and economy. So that in itself makes the region much more attractive because you are able to gain economies of scale, and there's harmonization of the regulations that govern how they operate, how they do business, how they register, how they allocate spectrum, and all of these things. And therefore, it increases the level of investment and it increases profitability, and it drives the cost down.
Is the one point that you made regarding the telecom providers is that they have invested in the region, and I sort of feel it for them when you look at the investment they've made on the fixed line infrastructure. Millions have been invested, and that is literally fast. It is becoming literally obsolete. So I guess how they work that out.
Digicel just yesterday, I mean, the representative from Digicel quoted a figure of $6 billion. I believe it was US dollars already invested in the region. They have a foundation as well that responds in terms of natural disasters to rebuild. So beyond making money, both Digicel, Cable Wireless, and other operators are, for want of a better term, giving back and being corporate, socially responsible citizens,
right.
Understanding that they have a vested interest in the region, not just to make money, but to ensure that people live good quality lives.
There we go. We lost the caller. I got to show one final question here because time is we've actually exhausted the clock. Would you agree that there need to be greater collaboration as we work together, greater collaboration between government and private sector to ensure that we realize the conversation of equity of internet service, and also the conversation of greater access, public access to internet as part of that conversation as we explore and expand this new expanse, the global digital world?
Certainly, and the Declaration of St. George's that was signed yesterday by Prime Minister Mitchell and the operatives is great evidence that that collaboration brings through. So it wasn't just the operators deciding to do it, it was the CARICOM heads of government agreeing on a single space policy, and us sitting down, even in the absence of laws, regulation that insists that they must do it, they recognize the benefit of supporting the CARICOM's position. And there are a lot of other players collaborated with us, including the Commonwealth Secretariat, the ITU, International Telecoms Union, to make this happen. So collaboration definitely, and this has in itself has demonstrated to us that we can achieve more, not necessarily always by making a law or making a regulation, but by cooperating and agreeing that if we do this, it is, we take a more sensible and logical approach to how we do business and how we advance this whole single space in our common interest.
My final question to you, there's always been the conversation of unifying the region, greater collaboration. What's your thoughts? How do you see this new structure that's been unveiled by the telecoms providers, addressing and answering the question of greater regional unification that we've been so longing for? Do you see this as probably a catalyst, something that could throw us in the right direction and add to the conversation?
Absolutely. And this, I think, is a good example in the area of telecoms, but I'm sure there are other areas of cooperation in agriculture and tourism. There are bilateral agreements, I'm sure, between Barbados and Guyana, Barbados and Trinidad in particular areas of common interest. So there is a model, and again, the extent to which we can emphasize that the region really is one space. Yes, there are sovereign nations, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But we are one community, and therefore, let us work together in the common interest. So, there's a clear political will. There's a clear political mandate. The heads of government are meeting next week. Prime Minister Mitchell will present to them and update them on the signing of this declaration. And I think it will be a catalyst to drive further cooperation within the region on many areas outside of telecommunications.
Great, thank you very much, sir. Indeed, it was a pleasure having you on To The Point. Mr. Rodney Taylor, the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. Thank you, sir, for being part of this conversation. All the best to you.
Thank you, Jesse, and good morning to your nice being here to you and your audience as well.
Thank you. To all the listeners and viewers, wherever you are, indeed it was a pleasure being here with you, and certainly we appreciate the time and the effort. As always, Jason, I always say to you, live life and love life. Treat each day as though it's your last day on planet Earth. And as you go forward, try your best to find the best version of yourself. Until then, JC loves you. Have yourself a great one. I'll continue with you right here on the Mid-Morning Buzz, keeping you company up until 12 midday. So long, everybody.